Hello, everyone. Today is February 9th, 2023. My guest today is Matt Khadri. Matt is a financial strategist. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Matt.
Great to see you again, Crush. It's been a while.
It's been a while. So we were talking about I said 2023 before the podcast, but I meant to say 2022 because I don't think we spoke to each other all of
At all.
last year.
Yeah, that's right.
And that one, I mean, it didn't seem very long ago that our last recording.
Dude, I still see I have like little memories come up on my phone for specific clips, and it'll say, hey, like, October a year ago, you did this. And that's when we did it, right? And we're in 2023 now, so it's already been 6 months-ish past that, or almost 6 months, right? So year and a half going on.
Yes. Time's really flying.
Crazy stuff, man. And life has changed a lot for me too, since then. So safe to say there's a lot to talk about.
What has changed for you, notably?
So for me, my biggest thing, a personal thing of mine, is I got to pay off my student loans, which was 50K at the height of it. So that started off in 2020 during COVID. And then in 2022, early 2022 is when I paid it off. So it took a little bit, but that was one big thing. Another big thing was I started a financial planning company. So actually designed to work with people who are in my age bracket, people who are, I would consider, young professionals who are typically overlooked in that industry. So people are usually only looking to work with older, more established people who are nearing retirement. And this is something a little bit different where I'm trying to get to know and talk and work with people who are just like me.
First, congratulations on your completing, paying off your loans. That's a really huge amount in 2 years. And so that's well done. And that's a testament, you can give to your potential clients and say, hey, look at, not as any sort of bragging rights, but just as a personal finance matter, like you want a financial strategist to be well versed in personal finances, and to pay off student loans like that is a good indication.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things I pitch, exactly like you said. It's all about having a plan, tracking your money, where it's going, and just staying on top of your lifestyle. You know what I mean? Like, do you really have to buy a super fancy car when you're 23, 24? No, right? Like, you probably have other better ways to spend your money. And in that case, for me, it was debt. And for a lot of people, it is. So
Nice. And so how has starting this company, what have you learned?
it's been a lot of fun, man. It's in the financial industry, right? So it's very regulated. There's tons of rules and tons of just guidelines I have to stay on top of, because it could be the reason the government doesn't let you operate as a business, right? So there's a lot of red tape, let's say. But that's good though, because it creates this level of trust that you can establish with your clients, right? They're not worried that you're going to scam them, because there's actually a lot of scams. We talked a lot about Bitcoin and crypto the last time we met, and a lot of scams have happened, reached the press, right, in a big way, like FTX, for example. And this is one of those things. This kind of business is one where I'm under the scrutiny of the government, and so it gives potential clients and customers a sense of ease in a way. So I like that about it. But the other big thing is that it's pretty hard to convince people to um, implement changes to their lives if you work with them, whether you're a trainer or a financial advisor, right? Which is my case. You might say, hey, this is really a great idea for you, but getting the person to actually do that is surprisingly difficult. And that's been a challenge for me, working with a few clients who might be really successful in some ways, but then they got this like one really bad habit, and getting in front of it and saying like, hey, this is how we should solve this. It's never as simple as just telling them this is how we solve it. So I find that pretty fascinating, a big psychological thing.
That's a very interesting point you make, because I have noticed that in some of the most financially savvy people, they know some of the most intricate aspects of the financial market, and they even know, what's good and what's not good spending habits, but they have a very difficult time implementing those actions.
Yeah, and so the secret sauce is really being able to get them to make those changes, and then coming back, like, a few months later when you work with them, uh, and saying, "Hey, this is the progress we made. Like, look at how our relationship has created this or executed on this opportunity, right?" And it's one of those things where, it's a service, and it's not the same thing as a product, right? The measure of success is just super different, and accomplishing that has been so much harder than I ever would have expected, because I'm more of a numbers guy. So if for me, a number adds up to a specific decision I should make, it's generally pretty easy to make that decision.
It's really interesting that you bring up that point. A lot of even me getting into finances, like my traditional education is engineering. I'm a numbers guy too, but there's a lot of qualitative finesse sort of aspects to it that kind of result in the quantitative number, but how it gets there is not always so cut and dry.
Yeah. No, dude. Yeah. For me, like, for example, I'm trying to think of a good example in my life. Probably, for me, I mean, in my early 20s, especially, going out was a big expense of mine. And it's one of those things where as you get older and you have more freedom, there's a bit of an inclination to spend more free time spending money. And so that'll mean, like, hey, it's Friday or it's Wednesday, let's go to happy hour. And then before you know it, it all just keeps adding up at the end of the month. And then you're like, wow, I spent $1,000 this month going to bars and restaurants. It's like, I never did that before, 2 years ago. And it's because you get more money, you have some more time, maybe you have a group of friends in the same boat. And that's how you kind of build up that habit. And then unwinding that habit and going the other direction is not easy.
No, that's a huge psychological dilemma that most people face. But even I think one thing that you pointed out that a lot of people don't reach is that number at the end of the month, and saying, so a lot of people I feel have no clue. They don't budget, one, and two, they don't evaluate what they actually spent compared to their budget. And that's a huge issue, because the first thing to making a big change is actually knowing those numbers.
Yeah. So I'm just totally curious. How do you personally budget at all, or how do you, if you do?
I do budget. I use mint.com,
Okay.
and I really like mint.com. Lets me it lets me keep tabs on all of my accounts,
Yep.
and it gives me my expenditures, so like I know how much I'm spending on groceries. I can actually see how much more I'm spending on groceries this year compared to 2 years ago.
Yep.
It's nearly 100 times. It's almost over 100 times more, and I don't feel like I'm purchasing very different foods. I feel like at the same foods, I'm purchasing somewhere along the lines of 100% more, or spending 100% more. But that's one is it's mint.com really is the big thing. How about for yourself?
So so before I talk about myself, I just want to follow this point for a second, because I think it's super interesting that you mentioned Mint. So what do you like the most about Mint? Is it just because it's simple, that the way that it just totals up your accounts, or what is it that makes you go to Mint over everything?
The the one of the few things is it's integrated, so I can put all of my accounts in one. It can be all of my bank accounts, it can be my credit cards, it can be even, I have a Robinhood account, put that in there. And so one, I can have my net worth, the value of my home, my mortgage, even when my car payment was there, it was able to integrate my car payment. And so with all that, I'm able to know my approximate net worth, which I really like, because then it's like, if there's a couple months where maybe I wasn't so, you know, I don't want to say I was irresponsible, but I wasn't as financially responsible for several months in 2022. And that was actually, I I don't know if you've ever heard of something called I got this from the 4 hour work week,
Okay. Yeah.
but it's called a mini retirement.
Yes.
And I kind of implemented that in 2022. And now I'm rescinding that because now it's like, all right, and I saw my net worth
Go
not
down.
increase. It didn't go down.
Oh,
That
okay.
that was the one thing. It actually didn't go down. And that was one thing I liked about Mint was that I was able to, and I told my friend this, I was like, even through this, I'm able to verify
Yeah.
that my net
Verify.
worth, that yes, I'm not becoming poorer. And a huge part of that is hedging a lot of my worth against inflation, assets that guard against inflation, such as a home. Because a huge portion of my wealth, as a young person, one of the biggest purchases we'll probably make is a home. And when you do that, I found, and I talked to one of my friends who has a background in finance, a big portion of your wealth as a young person could be in your home. And that was a huge guard against the my wealth dipping. But that's the one thing was that through that I was able to, and that was my goal through that was like, I'm not going to get poorer. I might not get richer right now, but I don't want to get poorer. So that's one thing. And then the budgeting, I like to check my budget once or twice every week. And I find that to be of great value because I mean, easily, you can spend hundreds of dollars within an hour. I mean, it doesn't take you just I told my coworker this a couple years ago. It was like I can't walk outside the door without spending money. And to some degree that's true. You go for a drive, you're going to spend money. You're going to go for a walk, you might want to get a drink, like even a water or something, and it's going to cost some money. So that's what I like about it. And also, Intuit, the company which makes Mint, is also the owners of TurboTax, and I find
Yep.
TurboTax to be a great product.
Good stuff. Yeah, I feel the same way about so much of what you just said when it comes to Mint and even TurboTax. For me, what I like the most about Mint, I've been using it. It was my first major budgeting tool in 2019 is when I started using it. I really like the way you described it just puts everything together in one place. Because imagine you have, 5 credit cards, 2 bank accounts, and you have to go through every transaction. It's just very impractical, right? And that was how it was to budget even just 10, 15, 20 years ago, which is really crazy to think about. It was way harder to do back then. So now you have stuff like Mint where you just make an account, you sign in, it puts everything together in front of you, your net worth even. Uh, that to me, it is such a no-brainer why anybody would use it, right? To me, I think every person our age in their early 20s, mid 20s should be starting off with an aggregator like Mint. Personally, I do take it one step further. I much prefer to use a spreadsheet because in finance, you become the spreadsheet master at your company. And once you get good with it, it's quite useful. I also like it because, Mint sometimes doesn't get the categories for specific expenses right. And so I like to take it one step further and just really stay on top of all the little things. But that's just me being a little bit nitpicky. I think the average person could be very successful using something like Mint, and it's not even work. You don't even have to pay for anything, which is the craziest part. So, but that's really the point I wanted to make is it's so easy, and yet people don't do it at all. And I don't know anybody actually in my friendship group who uses Mint. Of all the friends I have down here growing up in South Florida, none of them have a use a budgeting app, which I find fascinating because they might actually be high earners in their careers and doing really good. But it's like there's just no interest or no care to strategize beyond next month, right? So
Have you seen, I mean, there's a bit of a meme going around for the last year or so that one third of people making over 250K are living paycheck to paycheck.
yeah, and that's not even a, I don't even think that's a real, that's a meme. I think that was like based on a study or some article where some survey of people making that money said that. And I think it's so fascinating because, there's actually a lot of people who they make a lot of money, but they just spend so much of it and none of it's really invested or put away in any sort of capacity. And so that's kind of how you get into a scenario where most of your paycheck is spent, really it's on entertainment, going out and hanging out with friends and stuff like that, restaurants, bars. I find it's quite common with the people who work in white collar careers who are paid pretty well, because I think there's a bit of a cultural aspect where they go with their coworkers out to eat a lot and to hang out, and there's like a business aspect even too where it's just part of your company. Like if your company is an investment bank or some big firm like that, you'll do a big party celebration at the end of some big deal where everybody got a ton of money, right? And it just becomes this kind of like a reinforcing habit, right? So I can definitely see how people, even though they're making tons of money, because they just have no guardrails around their lifestyle, it just gets out of control. Because you can always spend yourself into debt, right? Like credit cards are just like, that's why credit cards are so dangerous, and that's why I think there's a big stigma against them. I love credit cards. I have a cool story to tell about that. This just happened. So in Christmas, I don't know if you heard about the Southwest flight cancellations right after Christmas. Yeah, so I went with my girl to Indiana, visited her family. Southwest, or all the flights got canceled the next day, and they offered me to, they canceled the next day's flight. Even the latest I can get back home was like 3-4 days later, and I had already been there for like 5 days. So I'm like, I really don't want to stay here longer. It's way too cold. And my credit card had a thing where if I bought it on that card and my flight was delayed for more than 6 hours or canceled, I can get up to $500 in reimbursements towards any sort of expenses that happen because I was stuck there. And that's what happened. I just got the check in the mail, or I just got notified I would receive a check like yesterday that I'm getting $500, because I had to buy a hotel room for the night. I rented a car to drive back home. I didn't want to stay there, and it like saved my back, in a way. And but the thing is, there's all kinds of perks like this for credit cards, but if you don't know how to use them, they become, they're a double-edged sword. And the problem is when you combine the cultural component of spending lots of money and having no guardrails with a double-edged sword, it's like being given a gun without knowing how to use it.
Absolutely. And I think the one big difference between now and maybe say 20 years ago is mobile banking, online banking. I mean, maybe paying off credit cards when you had to get something in the mail, put check in the mail, throw it back every month, and that was the protocol for paying off your credit cards. Maybe then I understand, because that's actually like work. That takes a lot of effort. But nowadays, the protocol is to do like a fingerprint on the phone to log into the app, go to the account, press pay, press transfer from my checking to my credit card, and it's paid. And if the issue is now people have to be responsible to not let that get to a point where they start paying interest, or even like maybe they don't pay interest, but it just gets out of control still. But I think that's one, like you said, finances with this online aspect have become easier. I mean, not to, but a lot of people, uh, there's a lot of things about online too that make things harder. For example, people can spend a lot of money on Amazon very quickly as well from the comfort of their couch.
That's a good point. Yeah, and I think that was actually one of the reasons why they thought Amazon, right? They thought they knew they had something. Is like, imagine, you don't have to go out and leave your house to go buy this thing. You can just buy it from your phone. People are going to buy everything from us if that's the case, and that's exactly what happened, right? So it's the same thing. But generally speaking, I think I think technology is a double-edged sword, right? For the most
Yes.
part. So when I see how, like the example you gave of having to send a check in the mail and all that, like the crazy part about that is you could never really keep track of your balance on your credit card unless you had like a checkbook and you balanced it like that or something, where you had to write down every transaction and the number to keep it all added up or something like that, right? um Nobody has to do anything like that anymore, which is so fascinating to me, why people still have serious issues with it. But it just keeps coming back to, uh, there's no controls put into place on your lifestyle, whether it's a budget or, hey, I'm not going to go out 3 days a week at least, or four. I mean, I'm going to schedule just 1 day a week going out, some sort of behavioral mechanism that you could stick to. Because we talked about this too. Being good at your personal finance is a lot like staying on top of your physical health. Like if you just ate cakes all day, you'll get fat really quick, and then all of these health problems will compound. It's the same thing when you use a credit card without, you just haphazardly, without paying attention. So I don't. There's no difference to me.
No, there's no difference, and people, they have to be accountable to themselves. I've heard one new credit, I'm not sure the word for it, but it's the monthly payments aspect that kind of has popped up over the last several months. We might have talked about it before, but I know that that adds a lot. I've heard that that adds even more credit to that people are just unaware of. They're like, oh, I can pay $25 today and get an iPhone 13, and then I just have to pay
Oh, the buy now,
20.
pay later. Yeah, yeah.
Yes. And it's another form of credit. And like one thing that I read recently in the last month, 2 months, that I thought was, kind of mind blowing, was Warren Buffett has taken out one loan in his entire life. And that loan was a mortgage. So that means he's only taken out, one loan. And when I think about that, and I think about, even mortgages to a certain degree, they're, if you have no idea, what finances are, it's a great hedge on inflation and a great, place to put value. But when you get as intricate as someone like Warren Buffett and understand what that means, he's only taken out one loan in his entire life. He's paid almost no interest. One of the richest men in the world has almost paid no interest. Um, that's how I interpret that.
Yeah, well, it's a debt is extreme. Well, okay, so the way I think about this as like a finance guy, so much of our economy runs on debt, which is why you'll hear a lot of people say debt is good. Like there's such things as good and bad debt, and there's a conversation around that. Like I don't know if you've heard of Rich Dad Poor Dad, that book. It's like
Yes.
yeah, Robert Kiyosaki. That guy cannot stop talking about debt because he's a big real estate guy. And the truth is, debt is a tool that can be used good, but the problem is, as consumers, as your average everyday people, we look at debt to buy stuff that is not going to pay us back, right? So that buy now pay later thing, why would you? I understand, like, there's so many people who will go and buy the latest iPhone and choose to make monthly payments towards the latest iPhone over the next year or two. And it sounds, the way they'll rationalize it is they'll say, well, why would I pay $700 now? I can just pay for it in little increments. The problem with that is that that makes sense for like the first iPhone, the only, the first thing you buy, let's say. But if you keep doing that with literally everything you spend money on, at some point along the way, there's going to be a ceiling, and then that's when you hit it. And then before you know it, you're drowning in your payments because you didn't really properly account for the fact that you just can't leverage everything. And it's kind of like the way the US just hit the debt ceiling. They have to now make payments to lower the debt that they have right now outstanding, or they have to raise the debt ceiling, right, to continue to spend more. But the problem is, we as everyday people, we can't just raise our limit on what we can be lent. And at some point along the way, the house of cards is going to fall down. And I think that's what happens with credit cards is people kind of like with the buy now pay later, they'll just run up the credit card and they'll hit their limit. And then that's when they start worrying about it, is when they hit their limit, because now they actually have to pull money from their checking account. And it's quite sad, to be honest, because it's all because of a lack of oversight. And that's all it comes down to.
Yes. And the that point is very sad, because one thing that I've said a couple times is people who don't make small sacrifices are eventually forced to make huge concessions. And in finance, that's one places where it's very evident. It's like you make small sacrifices along the way so that when that big thing hits, you're in a place, in a good position to be able to make the decision you feel you have to make. And Naval Ravikant, I don't know if you know who
I
that
love
is.
Naval. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, he talks about it. Wealth is freedom. The reason we want to get wealthy is so that we can be free. And that's all, that if you can take that for what it is, I mean, that's a good reason. It's not to control other people. It's not for reputation. He makes that point too. It's not about reputation. It's literally about the ability to say, I don't want to do that. What this was thing that, a lot of other people have to do to make money. I don't want to do that. I don't need to do that. I'm in a position where, I verified step by step. It's a slow process to be able to be in a good financial position for most people.
It takes a long time, and it also takes a lot of long-term forward thinking, I would say, because what I love about Naval is one of his quotes is, you I don't care how much money you make, but if you have to be somewhere at a specific time, at a specific day, and follow someone's orders, then you're not actually wealthy, right? And the truth is, like, he just dissed like pretty much all of corporate America, white collar jobs, because they might get paid really well sometimes, the executives especially, but they're on the hook for a lot of stuff, and it's almost like their lives aren't even their own at some point, right? They're in that machine of corporate America, and they're kind of, that's all they really have, right? So contrast that with people like Tim Ferriss, who wrote the 4 Hour Work Week, where he found that if you can just make so much money and you go to another country in this internet economy and it costs like nothing to live there and you can have this great lifestyle, why wouldn't you do that? And that was like the way and then he actually, I would argue, in that way, he's a lot wealthier than a lot of these, high earning CEOs, CFOs at these big companies in America, even though they might have like 20 times the money in their bank account. But it's not about that. It's just about being able to do whatever you want when you want.
They might not even have the money in their bank account. They might just have the incoming paychecks that are very high.
True. Yeah, there's a lot of people like that too. Or it might be, stock in the company that they work at, and they can't even sell it because it's restricted stock, and they have to own it because they're a chief stakeholder. And talk about having your hands tied. Are you really wealthy? No, I wouldn't say you're wealthy.
That's a very interesting dilemma that I've never thought of.
Yeah, dude. Restricted stock, like, you could be, people ask for transparency in finance, right? And one of the ways companies do that is they force their top people to hold to hold stock in that company for at least so much time. And all that does is it makes them on the hook for whatever happens to the company and however the market reacts to whatever happens to the company. And so if everything goes, if you're a top executive at Apple and then um, your supply warehouse in China blows up and the media finds out about it, the CEO is not going to like he can't get rid of his stock, or somebody in the company has stock in Apple that they get paid in even, and they can't get rid of it, but the stock just tanked like 10, 15, 20%, and their wealth just tanked, some percent because of it. And they can't do anything about it. They're not actually free.
No, not at all. And guarding ourselves from those types of situations is of the utmost importance.
Right. And, the way I would say we go about doing that is a very difficult question because it involves figuring out our own capabilities, what it is we have to offer the world, and how to actually put that in motion.
Yes. For example, maybe if this person was a good engineer and it was 2001 and he worked at Apple, that's a situation where yes, you want to take that money, you want to take those stocks, you want to stay there for 4 or 5 years. And that's everyone's situation is different based off of so many complicated factors.
Yeah, the way I think about it, especially for a lot of people my age who, I don't know if you've seen the stats, but it's like men are graduating less and less often compared to women. Women are graduating at like way higher rates. They're even making more money now. Very interesting to me, right? But I think it ties back to this idea that if you don't know yourself well enough to, in terms of where you think you'll go or where you think you can do good, then you're going to be in this weird limbo state where you're not going to be in the right job. You're not going to be able to develop the skill set that's compatible with you sooner than later, which means you won't make the money that you need to become free until way later and until you figure it out. And I think that's the problem for a lot of people is they don't really know themselves well enough perhaps to figure out that path that, oh, I would be a good engineer or I would be a good lawyer or whatever it is, right? You have to figure out what you're good at before you can even make the plan, because that's the goal that you have to have set up first.
How do you think people can go about figuring that out for their own situation?
So, like you said, people are all different, right? Everybody's got a different personality. I think my favorite way to approach this problem is by looking at your personality specifically. And in my life, the way I've approached it is I would actually take personality tests and I would read into the results and I would connect the whatever the results were to whatever careers fit well with those results. And for me, it turns out it's really funny. There's the big five personality tests, right? That's the most valid one scientifically. And then there's another one called it's a website, 16 personalities. It's not as valid. It's based in Carl Jungian psychology, but they say it's not as valid as the big five. But when I took that test 7, 8 years ago now, the results I got came with little career recommendations. And so one day, like a few months ago, I looked back at those recommendations and they're all jobs that I either have or am doing in my business or I'm trying to do in some capacity now. And I find it so interesting because I gravitated so naturally to these things and it worked out really well for me. And so I can't imagine if people just had just a little bit of awareness to go and take those kinds of tests as a first step, and just pick the thing they think resonates most with them, that comes as a recommendation. They might be really surprised to learn that it was a great fit for them, and they never would have thought about it had they not taken the test.
Self-reflection is a huge deal.
Yeah.
And that those types of tests, trying to analyze yourself, put that into a survey, and then at the same time getting some, real professional insight. I mean, granted, you said the 16 the 16 personality one is less valid, but there's still some form of validity that isn't, our bias in that. What positions did you see listed when you returned to when you checked the list out again?
Yeah, so the positions that came to me were, so actually it's kind of funny. My first job out of college was a financial analyst, right? So it just means a high, like an executive level person who is working with the executives to look at the company's numbers, essentially. That was one of them. So financial analyst was one of them. Financial advisor was one of them. Uh, lawyer was one of them, which a long time ago I considered being a lawyer. Um, what else is there? There's also consultant, which is kind of what I'm doing with the side business now. There was also trying to think, just a like a client facing person who's good with numbers, who's trying to show people how to do something. Kind of, there's a good way. I'm trying to remember if I can't. I think I even like computer programmer was in there. And there was a time when I started college, my first major going in was software engineering, and then I switched it. So I all these little dots started connecting when I saw this list again now a few months ago, and I was just so surprised to see, man, like I gravitated to these things so naturally before I was aware of the fact that it's all related to your personality.
Yes, and we have to take that into account. Playing into our strengths is valuable. I think guarding our weaknesses is also valuable, but our strengths are where we're going to contribute, where society is going to value us the most. And that's, you know, a lot of people our age have this idea that they want to do something in particular. They want to work in sustainability. They want to work in water. They want to work. I had a friend who told me they wanted to work in water, and that person,
I've never
uh,
heard that.
like water treatment, water
Okay.
sustainability,
Okay.
water, like something along the lines. Eventually, that person now works at a company that is attempting to remove microplastics from water, which is
Yep.
a very important thing. But those jobs aren't highly available. They're not valued very highly. You're going to have a tough time finding that. Once you end that particular job, you're going to have a tough time finding a new job. And one thing for me is that I've always, with jobs, it's like the path of least resistance for me. It's like society, the economy has these things that they value very highly. And those things are represented by the pay. And it's not about, actually, you know what? The more and I'm an engineer, the more I did not like engineering when I was 18 years old and started engineering. It's like I actually appreciate it much more right now that I've spent the time, but like I only gravitated towards it because it's a good, it's a high paying job that I didn't need to go to an, I didn't go to get my master's. I just got my BS and then I got out. And so I think that's something. It's like, I didn't get to work in water. I didn't get to work in recycling. Um, but I feel pretty financially stable right now. And like people, a lot of people need to take that more into account, is like that's something that matters and you don't realize it. A lot of people don't realize it until it's too late, like you said, and that's a very sad point.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, because I think part of it's also a generational thing where in the past people would take really good pride in doing a job well done, even if it was in something small, objectively small. And I think in today's world, where we're constantly comparing ourselves to these ideals, whether they're real or not, that we see on social media, especially, it probably makes us feel like we're wasting our time doing small stuff, even though it's part of the journey. And I think I fell into the same trap myself. And I still struggle with this a little bit because I'm always trying to do bigger things. But when I had my first job and I was working with the CEO of this company, and it was really cool because it's, I didn't really get to learn this until I started working at these companies, where the people who are at the very, very top, they are monsters, and like the best way to put it, right? They're extremely competent. They're really sharp with their language. They know how to use words really well and say things and present things and convince people. And they kind of scared, like me being like 22 at the time, they scared me with how good they were even at like 60 years old. Because I would never see anybody in my day-to-day life who looked that competent and that confident, or even presented that way. And so when when they would ask me to do something that was very easy for me to do, like fix a spreadsheet on the computer, because you got to realize they're 60 years old, right? There was no Excel when they were in their 20s. To them, we call them technologically illiterate and we poke fun at them. But this dude was so appreciative that I could do that for him, even if it was a small thing for me. And in a way, it made me feel like, man, like I can help this guy, and this guy is like a badass. Yet there's something about me that he needs me for. And understanding that was a very pivotal moment in that job, because when I started the job, I felt like I wasn't being given the most opportunity. And that was like a little bit of a pivotal moment for me to realize, even in these small things that I consider are nothing, this guy really appreciates me, and I actually really admire this guy. And so how am I going to not equate, what he's appreciating me for with something in some way that's valuable?
Yes. And that's awesome that you recognize that very small token of gratitude that guy had, or that token of gratitude that guy had for what wasn't a very intensive work, which wasn't very intensive work for you. And people need to capitalize on making sure that they see those moments, and that those making those moments count is vital, because that's what life is. It's a series of very small moments that kind of have a big feeling that we look back on.
Yeah, I think in general people would benefit a lot from developing a better sense of empathy, especially in the workplace, because the thing that keeps coming back to me is I'm the younger kid who's good with technology, and everybody who needs help with technology, they'll look at me, and before you know it, people kind of depend on me for some stuff, right? And I think that's the case for a lot of people in our generation who are going into the workforce, and they have this like very niche set of skills that older people just don't have. And understanding that, even though it seems very small to you, the fact that it's something that only you can do, or your people, your generation can do, should make you feel like that's your way in to gaining more responsibility, gaining more credibility, getting more respect, and just growing, right? You take advantage of any opportunity that's given to you, instead of just saying, "Oh, it's not good enough."
Yes. And that's not a good mentality. It's not. I mean, some things we definitely should avoid, um, but being a little humble, especially at the beginning. And for example, like I felt the same way too, but there are also some instances where, junior level people, they can't really see everything that's going
Yeah.
on. They don't understand. So like they have a perception that they can do something. And I had this that they're able to take on a situation, but really if they were given that there's a decent chance, you know, they don't have the full picture. And it's tends to be a bit more complicated than junior people I think give it credit for.
That's right. Right. So it's like you haven't even worked here a year and you think you can run everything. And I like to think that people do make those kinds of assumptions way too early on
Yes.
because my big phrase is life is complicated, there's lots of stuff to consider and you don't know it all. You don't have it all figured out, let alone in this business, right? If you're starting a new job, you're not going to have it all figured out for quite some time, right? People are going to have to help you and tell you stuff, and you need people, right? And you need people to like you, so you should be humble.
One of the biggest lies, I don't know if this is an actual lie, but kind of just something that I think went about over the last 10 years is this idea of a young entrepreneur CEO making it huge. And it's like there are a couple notable ones, Mark Zuckerberg being the most notable one. I think also Airbnb CEO was relatively young, but a lot of the CEOs are not that young. It took decades. Also, actually, Elon Musk got rich off of PayPal, I think at like 29 to 32, something around that age. So that's relatively young too. Um, but it's kind of a fabrication. And I think it leads to that mentality where like it we can't get super rich super fast without much work. That's just
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
not gonna happen. I mean, it people who get rich tend to do a lot of work over a long period of time and get lucky along the way. And I think those are the people who are super rich. I think people who are just well off, you don't need to get that lucky if you're willing to work hard and take it slow.
Right. So the way I see it is there's really there's a few different paths, but the first two that I can think of is you are a hardworking person. You went to school, you did a good job, you got a good job coming out, you got rid of your debt, you're focusing on getting a promotion, or maybe you switch jobs to get more money, whatever you had to do. And you just keep doing that and keep gaining responsibility and figuring out your weaknesses and learning more on the job and just moving up the ladder, let's just say, playing that role. You're going to keep making money. And as long as you have your spending under control, you will be pretty wealthy by the time you're in your mid 30s. Like, no problem. Pretty much guaranteed is you just invest it, save 20%, 30% of it, and don't go too crazy. And that's really all it takes. Now, if you wanted to be like a really rich person, like we're talking over $10 million inflation adjusted, right? That's just generally more difficult to do because there's only so much time in every day, and we're talking about a really short time frame. So that's when you get these stories of these young CEOs like the Elon Musk and the Mark Zuckerberg. And when you really analyze them, interviews with them, or see how they talk and how they think, these guys are pretty smart guys. They're very talented. That they're not the norm. The average person is just not at that level. But the other thing is that to be able to create, they've also taken advantage of the technologies that were new and innovative at that time, and applied them to specific things that to specific problems that haven't been solved yet. And that's why they fill this big gap in the market, and then the market sees it and it just jumps on it and it becomes this huge living business, right? And that's how it was with Facebook. I mean, Mark went to Harvard, started Facebook out of his dorm room, I think it was, and it was initially just for the universities around the area, Yale, Harvard, that kind of thing. And then, something about it really took off and resonated with people. It was like, oh, we get to see and connect with people across the world or across the schools, and catch up and connect, social media. And it became huge like that. For Elon Musk, PayPal was in the, I think, late 90s, right? So there was nothing like PayPal at the time. And I was using PayPal when I was like 8 years old.
I
And
remember.
yeah, and he ended up selling it to, I forgot who bought it, but he sold it for like $100 million because it was so well created, it was well developed at a time when nothing like it existed. And some bigger company with the money to do so came in and was like, we want that for us. And he sold it. And that's how he made a ton of money. But the truth is, it's hard to do that in general, because now there are so many people trying to do that all the time, probably more than before, I would argue, in with the internet age, right? But now I would argue the next phase is something like the Web3 world, whether it's crypto related, metaverse related. There's got to be some sort of technology that's underlying those things that I think is going to be how there's going to be another Mark Zuckerberg or another Elon Musk in that realm using that technology to solve a very specific problem. The question is, what is the problem that's going to be solved, and how are you going to do it? So that's somebody's, I can guarantee you somebody's in there right now trying to figure it out. But
Yeah.
we're not all going to do that, right? So pick your path and play the long game, because very few people are cut out for that sort of truly visionary way of living, and it's not easy.
No, it's not easy. And what should become a bit more well known is the names of people who utterly failed, who are completely broke today, and who tried products that might be the same exact things as what everyone else, as a different type of PayPal or a different type of social media that failed, because I mean that we just don't know.
Well, that's the thing is people don't really. There's a lot of survivorship bias, right? which just
Yes.
which just means we pay attention to whoever's standing and we forget about anybody who ever played and failed, right? And there's a lot, there's nonstop examples of it, but it never even makes it far enough to where people even hear about it, and nobody gives it any time of day. But but that's the thing is that's actually why I like business so much, is because you are really, you're paid to take a big risk, and if it goes really well, you might make a lot of money. Or if you did something wrong, maybe it wasn't the right time, maybe you didn't have the right target market, or something, you did something wrong, you're not going to make any money, and you're going to learn a lot from it. But it's up to you to pick yourself up and keep trying, right? And that's I believe that's the case for a lot of successful people too, who had ideas and chose not to give up on them. And over the course of time, maybe it wasn't an overnight success, they did make it. And there are a lot of, I think one of the good examples I can think of is the dude for in the Kentucky Fried Chicken logo. What's his name? Colonel Sanders, I think, or I don't know his name. But
Yes.
he didn't get, he might have been working in restaurants for a long time, and then he had the KFC concept in his head, but he didn't do it until he was like in his 50s or 60s, right? That's there's nothing wrong with that, right? But people are too much in a hurry to succeed now. And I put myself in that camp too. I mean, I put a lot of pressure on myself to do big things, and uh we got to learn how to balance that a little bit.
Yes, I think I do too. And You do have to balance that. And I think the one thing that you've highlighted and you spoke about with that one example of you providing that service to your first boss is we reach for the stars. And, you know, that Colonel Sanders probably wouldn't have been able to create KFC 20 years before he did. He probably just didn't have the skills, the connections, whatever it may have been. He wasn't in the place to create KFC. He probably did much smaller things that unrecognizable, no one cares about, they're meaningless in the grand scheme of things, but eventually all of those small things, I'm sure he took it in stride and it was able to get him to be, create a very successful, I'm not sure the story, but eventually create what we now know as KFC. One other thing, though, relating to this is that, again, people don't take this in stride. They don't take the small successes as meaningful. And I feel like there are so many people that burn themselves out. I mean, this is once you life is a long haul. It's like decades long. And this new internet economy, this new, engaging with people, I'm thinking about like podcasting and like kind of business too. And it's a long haul. I mean, you got to be prepared for the next 20 years. I mean, you're 26, I'm 29. We could in 20 years, we're the age that most successful on CEOs are at. And people just have to keep that in mind. And especially people our age, they want, I feel we want something grandiose, much younger than we deserve it. But I do want to pivot because and think about things in a more macro scale.
Yeah.
So I had a friend, Jordan Naidu, he was on the podcast. He's in finances in Britain, and he brought up one kind of interesting point. He said Europeans don't invest like Americans do. And that's kind of one strength of Americans, is that we have this mentality of investing. Another thing, our unemployment rates are very low. And although a lot of people my age maybe not so financially, responsible in the sense of their expenditures, I know very few people that don't have a job and aren't able to sustain like a pretty solid job. So, what do you think? There are several aspects of the US economy that are interesting, but what do you think about the US economy now, February 2023? What are your opinions on it?
Wow, it's a really big question. So this is one of the things we're actually talking about at my company right now is we're coming off of COVID. Inflation was a big problem last year, last 2 years almost. Now the central banks are increasing their interest rates, and that's going to make everything change. It's going to force companies to become more profitable so that their investors stay happy. And one of the ways in which they attempt to become more profitable is by spending less money and generating the same revenue while spending less money, which means they'll lay off people, right? So I think one of my recent posts on Instagram I talked about is you take some of the biggest names, right? Meta, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, them and Disney now was a new one. It's way over 100,000 people they're going to lay off, and they're not low level people. They're like medium level people, like mid to late 20s, early 30s. That's all going to be dumped into the unemployment rate. But now those are the two big factors: the unemployment rate and inflation. That's all the Federal Reserve cares about, and that is dictating their decisions every month, whether they increase rates further. Now, the problem is the unemployment rate. It's a very simple equation, but I don't think people are reminded of it enough. And the equation is the number of people who have jobs and or sorry, the number of people who do not have jobs and are looking out of the population of people who do have jobs and that population of people that do not have jobs. So if you have 100,000 people and 1,000 of them are looking for jobs but can't get one, then the unemployment rate's 1%. But the thing that this doesn't capture is the number of people who stop looking for jobs because they exit that 100,000 altogether. So if you have 100,000 people and 1,000 people are still looking and they can't find one, unemployment rate's 1%. But if 500 people just stopped looking for jobs, then now it's going to be 500 out of 99,500. And it shifts the numbers a little bit. Now, I believe that is happening in some way where you have people who are no longer looking to work full time. People are I see a lot of reports of people moving back in with their parents and trying to save, like spend less money, save money somehow. Maybe they got laid off. But I can't help but think that we have all these companies laying off employees. And another data point is that apparently in America, a lot of consumers still have in total a decent amount of money in the bank still since COVID, because that money was saved, right? Everything was on lockdown for quite some time. People had a little bit of extra money. It's burnt down a little bit because of inflation, but it's still there. So there's this idea that you have less people actively looking for work, and they're also surviving off of some money that they still have. And that's creating this scenario where it looks like unemployment is good, like there aren't that many people who don't have jobs, and the economy is going to get better much quicker than people thought a few months ago. A lot of the forecasts right now are saying that inflation is going to go back to normal, in meaning like what it used to be before COVID, in like 2 years or so, right? By the end of this year, it's going to be like in a much more controlled state. Is that true? Nobody really knows. It's all one big prediction. And there's a lot of conflicting data, right? So people are just trying to put some fortune, act like a fortune teller essentially, and try to dictate and say, hey, next year is going to be great, we're going to be over here. I think what's happening is people are all just putting forward what they want to believe, whether it's positive or negative. For example, at my company, the outlook was very positive. It was like inflation's going to go back to normal. And then at another company that we spoke to, different company, a consulting firm, they said, "Oh, it's going to be like way worse than everybody's saying, because there's all these different factors that haven't existed in previous recessions, like that are happening at the same time right now. So instead of it being like one thing, it's like 4 different things at the same time. Energy supply problems, you have inflation generally, you have layoffs coming as companies tighten up, and then I forgot the 4th thing. And it's like, oh yeah, real estate was the 4th thing.
Does crypto play any part in the economy?
I think crypto is just a reflection of how much. So crypto, and think about it this way. So in 2020, when the market tanked and people just started putting money into crypto, and they would joke about how they'll take their check from Trump, the COVID relief check, and throw it into crypto, or throw it into some stock bet. that is the best way to think about how people thought of crypto then. And I believe that is still the case now, except the difference is because the stock market tanked in the like last year, crypto also tanked. And there was this idea that the stock market and crypto are two very different things and they're going to move in totally different ways. And that might be true when you move up, but when it all comes down, things tend to go down at the same time. And the difference is crypto went down way harder because it went up way higher before it went down than the stock market did. And I believe it is a reflection of how much money people have available sitting around to bet and make money in the short term. And I believe that I definitely believe that people have less money sitting in their checking account because of inflation. The way we were talking about just going to buy groceries. I mean, every time I buy from, I've been buying from Whole Foods the last couple of years now. And what I'll do is I'll order on the Amazon app where I can go pick it up. So I drive up and they just put it in my trunk. It's pretty cool. Every week, or maybe like a few months ago, for a good couple months straight, every time I ordered, I swear to God, of the 40, 50 things I bought at a time, every week or every other week, there was at least a couple products where the price would be increased and it would tell me, it'd say, hey, there have been price changes. Here are the 3 or 4 things that have changed, and here's the new price. And the price would go up like 20%, 15% on each of these items. And then it would just keep going up. And I believe that this is happening across the board, and it is already having a big impact. So I think it all just depends on this whole big economy thing. I think it just depends on how many layoffs are there going to be, how many companies are going to be willing to axe what, 10-20% of their workforce, and how much money do people have in the bank, and is it enough to weather that storm, that time period where it might be a little bit harder to get a job. So I think that's all it comes down to.
Yes, that that makes sense. And the reason I brought up crypto is because for people our age, I know multiple people who have used crypto as their hedge on inflation. They were like, I don't want a home. I want Bitcoin. I want 20 Ethereum. I want um all these things. And that's kind of why I say I bring crypto into the equation, because maybe not for people that are older, but then for people our age, it's like maybe not all of them too. I know many people who are very skeptical of it, but I know several who bet on it. And so that's kind of where I'm going. It's like, someone who made like $3 million in 2020, but now they're absolutely broke. And it's just how does this play, that kind of, it goes into it. It's a factor into some people's equation of, you got to be able to weather the storms.
That's true. And the way you put it makes a lot of sense, because for me, I viewed the stock market as a huge opportunity right now. And
Yes.
and a lot of people don't a lot of people would look at me and laugh and say, yeah, but crypto is a way bigger opportunity. And the truth is, people don't really know, right? Like, I could be totally wrong, and crypto could make way more money in the next 50 years than the stock market could. But to me, I still don't see, and I've learned a lot about crypto since we last spoke, actually. I still don't see how that increase will be facilitated in a way that the market will see. Because for me, right now, for example, it's really easy for me to explain why the stock market went down in the last 6 months, right? Or even the last year. The Federal Reserve has continued to increase interest rates. That's going to help control inflation, but at the same time, any company who hasn't been profitable can no longer borrow debt at these extremely low rates that they've been doing so, which means that they might go bankrupt because they're not cash flow positive the way you were talking about that one stock. And they're just going to keep burning through their cash until they have nothing. And cash is the lifeblood of the business, right? So you raise interest rates, companies just can't raise cash the same way. And all of the small companies or the fast growing companies that would always talk about how big they're going to be, even though they're not profitable now, those are the ones that are going to lose out the most. And that's actually what you saw is in the NASDAQ, which is the index for pretty much all the tech stocks. They're the ones that got beat up the hardest in the last year. Now, the difference is, I can explain that very easily, like all day long. But when I look at crypto and I see how it declined, my only explanation for it is people don't really believe in it firmly enough to hold on to it, and it's a highly speculative, uh, call it asset if you want, in general, right? So because it's speculative, people will go in and out very quickly and treat it that way versus treating it like they own a piece of a company, which to me is very different. I mean, I look at the companies that I invest in as like, I actually believe in this thing and I see their performance. I was talking about that credit card earlier that I got that benefit from. And it's actually an American Express card, right? And I got it like 2 years ago almost. And I really love that card. Like it's been super cool to own and the experience has been great. The app is awesome. Customer support's amazing. And I see that company on one of my companies that I invest in. And I'm like, I like the idea of owning a piece of that. But I just don't feel this. I still don't feel the same way about Ethereum or Bitcoin or XRP or Ripple or any of these things. And is there technology beneath these currencies that could be useful to society? Yes, I think so. But I don't think that has anything to do with the currency itself. So that's the difference, right? It's like saying, it's hard to make a comparison because I'm trying to think of like previous generations of the internet, but the blockchain, for example, the underlying technology of Bitcoin blockchain, extremely useful, could change the game in a lot of ways, right? But that you can have blockchain and not have Bitcoin, right? You can invest in blockchain without buying Bitcoin. And that's the point I'm trying to make, right? People have been conflating the two things, the technology with the currency, and it's just not the same.
No, and you're making such a valuable point that so many people miss. And when I tell people that, public ledger distributed ledger technology is extremely valuable, it makes so much sense. I'm a software engineer. When I look at the way that modern digital cash is stored in bank servers compared to the idea of a blockchain or a public or a distributed ledger that everyone has awareness of, it's very obvious that one software system, the blockchain, the distributed ledgers are more secure than the standalone server in the bank. Even if the bank has got as much physical security, as much cyber security as possible, it is a less secure system than Bitcoin. Bitcoin is actually one of the few systems that has not been penetrated itself. Many people get scammed by it. The ledger isn't wrong. When people get scammed, it's usually because they got phished, they released some information they shouldn't have, something along those lines. But Bitcoin itself isn't lying about where the Bitcoins went. I think the biggest thing that a lot of people have issue with Bitcoin, with Ethereum, with these ledgers is they're fabricated. I mean, I when the US government prints bills, at least it's the US government, it's a government that has like a firm established place within all. It regulates, that it has an SEC, it has a military, it has all of these things. When software engineers begin fabricating
Yeah.
digital coins, it becomes very obviously a Ponzi scheme. And, I don't know if you saw Charlie Munger, you know who Charlie Munger
Oh,
is.
I love Charlie Munger. Yeah.
Charlie Munger is a very, very good person to look. He has a lot of good advice. He thinks that Bitcoins should they should stop being sold, that cryptocurrency should stop being sold. And because he made this reference to like a shipping company that was heavily invested in the 1700s in England, and they stopped people investing in it because the shipping company wasn't putting returns out in a timely manner. So the England just said no one's allowed to invest in this. And Charlie said something similar should be done with crypto. And it's true. I mean, really, I don't want to invest in a cryptocurrency that I'm not, you can make the same argument that's with the USD. Like there are some people that are extreme that are, they're born with more. So they get, they're kind of born into a better position. But I don't know, it seems like a Ponzi scheme. And when, software engineers begin to fabricate things that people are taking as cash, it doesn't sit well with a lot of people.
Yes. And that's a really good way to put it, because I have one of my friends, he's always looking for like some way to some hack in the system, right? Oh, there's gonna be this new, token. It's gonna pay out an interest rate, right? Because they have this distributed system that lends portions of whatever you invest. So it's like buying an actual bond in the stock market, in the bond market, except it's crypto. And I'm like, okay, that sounds interesting and financially like a financial model that's used in the real world, but I am sketched out at the mechanics of it. And there's no regulation, right? It's straight up being treated like a security, but is just skirting all the laws and rules that I was telling you about that I had to do to even start my company. And it's supposed to make you wealthy very quickly. Things just don't add up, right? And then what ended up happening was my friend actually like lost, I think it was like 30, $40,000, because it was essentially like a fishing trap. And he's an older guy, he's got some money, so he didn't, it wasn't, thankfully it wasn't a lot of money for him, but it's like, that's an example of a really dumb mistake to make, to me. And I can't tell you how many people have that mentality of like, oh, I'm just going to try to get rich off of this really quick. And I think that example with the software engineers is a really great point, because what is stopping a technically savvy engineer from doing something like that, right? That's essentially, like you said, it's a Ponzi scheme, but it's the same thing in the financial markets when people try to create a company that doesn't, or advertise a company that doesn't even really exist, that doesn't have all the proper controls in place, that hasn't been registered to sell shares in, right? Imagine, I start a fake, you and me start a fake company, and it's going to be like this revolutionary digital banking, personal finance thing, and it's going to magically do all these things, and people are like, yeah, how do we invest in it? And we just start issuing shares somehow, and then we get paid for it, and then before you know it, we just turn around and run with all the money. That's exactly what's happening in a lot of these token schemes. Is the tokens get pumped up, and then maybe they get canceled, maybe the owners delist them or deactivate them somehow. There's no rules. It's like the Wild West, and it's sad to think that people are falling for it after for years it being in the spotlight. And now you have this whole other thing with like FTX, which is very interesting because it's so big, it ties into politics, and the level of corruption is just insane. And that's probably the tip of the iceberg for crypto.
I mean, SBF was there's videos of him with Tom Brady just hanging out. I mean, I don't know how it gets bigger than donating that much money to political parties and being with the most famous athlete in America.
Yeah, it's that stuff is crazy, man. And I think I don't think it stops there. I think there's going to be some. I think even like Kim Kardashian or somebody was being sued for advertising a specific token, like crypto token, and it falls under securities law. Like you can't advertise, like you people just can't go and advertise stock. Very they just can't go and do it easily, right? There's a lot of check boxes that you have to mark off first, tons of regulation, and I believe the ruling was this crypto token counts as a security, and Kim Kardashian and all these other people essentially artificially pumped the price via their advertisement for it on their major social media platforms, and they profited off of it by millions of dollars. That's market manipulation, right? Classic. And probably going to be way more examples of that in the future, just not now because of the state of the economy, which I think is kind of funny because 2 years ago, not even, it was all over the place.
A year and like 3 months ago, I remember fall of right when we were had our
Yeah, that's
podcast,
right.
October of 2021, it was on the up and up. I mean, crypto and Web 3.0 and NFTs. End of 2021 was just really high.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember that too, because even at my job, one of the things they asked us was, hey, we need to talk about the opportunities with Web3 to our investors, right? And because the investors, right, they have all this money in our company, they want to know what we see in Web3. So now it's my job now to go learn about Web3, and this is a few months after you and I spoke, which is why I learned anything about it, right? But then what happened after that? Like 2-3 months later, all of the interest in the metaverse and Web3 just like went down the drain for some reason, and
Yes.
then it never really came. It's all in the background now. I find that so, but it all ties back to the economy and how people are reprioritizing because of what's going on now, and people actually don't have the money or to even speculate in these things. I don't think, right? So what matters now is the companies that have been there this entire time who actually make money.
Matt, it's been a great conversation, and we talked a lot about defending ourselves against irresponsible financial behavior and, possibly irresponsible financial investments. Do you have any final words you'd like to give the audience?
Yeah, I would just like to say that as long as you have your head in the right place and you're thinking long term, things are going to go great for you. And it's important that we just don't get distracted from the noise that is constantly being thrown at us. You just keep your head in the right place, everything's going to be great.
My guest today has been Matt Khadri. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Matt.
Thank you, Karosh.